I think I won't need much time, so it's a small update of my work. So in my thesis work, I am trying to find out effective urban heat island effect mitigation strategies for a neighborhood which is Broadway East in Baltimore. And I have like two parts. One is computational modeling and one is community engagement. So today I'm not presenting the part with computational modeling, but I'm trying to show how community engagement is actually guiding my work. So this is my initial conceptual framework where different BSEC activities actually um, um, helped at different ways to select the mitigation strategies and also the locations. From the kickoff meeting workshop, we heard the issues that needs to be addressed, and heat was one of those. And later on, we had a heat focus group where we had around 30 community people, and we heard about the resources they have and the adaptation and mitigation strategies they currently use during heat wave, and what are the things that maybe other neighborhoods have but they don't have, and what are the health issues they're facing, and are there other concerns or preferences and all that. And we also had a climate adaptation and resilience framing meeting where we had some feedback on environmental objective and environmental metrics. So what are the things we can measure so that we understand we are doing progress? So from these helped to formulate the mitigation strategies. So what are the infrastructure they prefer within a neighborhood? Like they mentioned about trees, they mentioned about grasses, and also they mentioned about access to water bodies, and what they feel when they are sitting outside near the street and all that. And from there, I am trying to shortlist my mitigation strategies, and these will be simulated. And after the simulation, I will go back to the community again to understand if what are the strategies they prefer, and then we will have the simulation results that what are actually effective. So these thesis evolves around community engagement, like selecting the strategies from the thing we heard from them, doing some simulation work, and then again going back and understanding their preferences and coming up with some design guidelines. And this is how the BSEC heat team focus activities helped us to identify the strategies they mentioned. Like, so they mentioned about trees, about innovative urban design, importance of community environmental programs, and importance of community engagement. And we also have an understanding their perceived impact, like how the shade will create cooler environment, how it is important to integrate community people so that these are accepted by them, and also about their preferred locations. So they mentioned about parking lots, vacant plots along the roadways. So where are the places that intervention can be done, and some challenges they mentioned. So from there, like what are the urban design interventions that they expressed their interest in, and also how to work with community. And it is helping me to formulate my the next step with simulation, what I'm working on. So this is the small update from my work.
Thanks so much, Tasneem.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. Anywhere to make it bigger? This is okay, the view? It's okay? Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Tanya Sanders Tack. I'm an associate professor of city and regional planning at Morgan State. I'm going to talk about BSEC Science Education Program. Kalia Young, who is our community engagement coordinator and who is over the science education program, unfortunately wasn't able to give the presentation, so I'm going to do my best to do justice to her slides. Okay, so I'm probably going to skip this one just because we know what BSEC is about. And I want to talk to you all about the science education program. So, out of the 9 theme teams that BSEC has, we had 3 that participated in the summer of 2024, which was water quality, soil, vegetation and soils, and atmospheric dynamics. And they participated at 3 of our partner sites: Plantation Park Heights Urban Farm, Temple X, and Liberty Rec and Tech. Now, each of the sites hosts youth throughout the year, focusing on environmental related topics. And what were some of the learning objectives for the science education program? Well, we wanted the students to have a basic scientific knowledge on urban environment and ecology. We wanted them to know how to use the tools that help to measure the health of their environment. Uh, we were going for interactive trainings with our scientists so that they'll be prepared to do their own testing and maybe even peer-to-peer training in the future. And ultimately, the goal was to be able to utilize all this information for the betterment of the community. So, how did the science education program come about? So, one of the first things we did was we invited the scientists to come do site visits. So, the scientists would come to the 3 sites and they would be able to see how the programs that each of the sites had, how they operated. And then they would be able to think about how they could, either infuse or overlay and really integrate the work that BSEC was doing into each of the specific site programs. And so they sat down with the leadership of each of the sites. So if it was Plantation Park Heights, they sat down with Farmer Chippy and kind of talked about, well, that back and forth. Really, that's how the co-design happens. They sit down, they're able to visit the site, they sit down with the leadership, and then they're able to go back to their team, come up with some ideas, and then they would then share the program that they were going to do with the leadership, with the community, to get additional feedback, and then they would be able to make some tweaks to it, and then eventually they would be there for about a 2-hour interactive session with the youth. So, what kinds of activities did they do? Well, the youth were able to participate in the assembling of a weather station. They collected data from Ambient app and discussed how this data can be used to predict weather in the future. They did a walkthrough of green spaces and looked at what kind of trees were there and how they could tell the difference between the trees. They collected soil samples. They were able to participate in doing water samples as well and comparing what bad water samples as compared to good water samples look like. They also participated in infiltration activities on pervious and impervious surfaces. And then lastly, they had a call to action. They were able to figure out what they should do if they had environmental concerns, how to use Baltimore City's 311 app to report environmental concerns. So just a little bit about the partner site. Temple X is operated out of the Liberty Grace Church of God. They advocate for the curation of sacred spaces, providing children with experiential learning outdoors, and they are in West Baltimore. We also have Liberty Rec and Tech and their Liberty Village project, which is operated by the Baltimore City Public Schools. And that program consists of food assistance, after school tutoring, and trauma support services, and is also located in West Baltimore. And then lastly, we have Plantation Park Heights, which is dedicated to sustainable agriculture, community engagement, and environmental stewardship. And it is located in Park Heights, which is also in West Baltimore. And so, one of the things that we wanted to do was to understand how the science education program impacted the youth. So, we had a pre and post test, and what we found out, the students came into this program with some environmental awareness, but the program did help increase their environmental education and that they were able to hold on to those increases as well. So what were some of the best practices from our science education program? Really, it's the co-design. It's having the researchers, again, come to the site and then having the researchers be able to watch and see how the site's current student programming happens, and then figuring out how they can infuse the BSEC science into those programs. And then again, it's that back and forth with the leadership of the particular site about what are some ideas that we think we can do, and what do you think of this, and then that refinement of those ideas before it's then presented to the student. So that's one of the things that we would say was a huge success, is that co-designing of the science education. And then lastly, upcoming for the science education program in 2025, which will run through May through August. Right now, we have 3 theme teams involved in it: air quality, atmospheric dynamics, and water quality. And our collaborators right now are Parks and People Foundation and Ashburton, which is a veterans group. And our third site we haven't quite nailed down yet. In addition, on April 14th from 5 p.m. to 7:30, we will have our Urban Climate and Environmental Science Fair at Parks and People Foundation. This will be an opportunity for our climate scientists to do demonstrations, to show the community how to use the tools that they use to measure the health of our environment. It really should be a great and fun time for everyone. We also have a reflective writing training that's coming up for graduate students and interested researchers at Morgan State University. So that should be a really good training. And then lastly, we have a cross collaboration opportunity between those involved in the science education program and MSU students, where they'll be installing weather stations and assisting with their deployment, as well as working on a community engagement toolkit for weather stations. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Derek, who's going to talk about our our citizen science program that we are framing out. Derek, let me stop sharing.
Yeah. Can you just share my screen, my presentation?
Are you unable to share your screen?
Yes.
Matt can probably address that.
Everybody should be able to share their screen.
No? Okay, then I'm going to download your presentation and see if I can share it on your behalf.
Well, Tanya does that, Derek. Why don't you make sure that your microphone is working so that we can hear and understand you properly? I know we've had problems with that in the past.
Can you hear me?
Not great.
We can hear you, but yeah, it's not the best. You might want to just speak up. And I have your presentation on the screen.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes.
That's better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So I will be presenting the ethical considerations in citizen science and ensuring that integrity, addressing intellectual property, conflict of interest, and exploitations. So typically the term citizen science dates started since the 1989s, and its range and take into consideration different fields, including climate, astronomy, urban planning. So the main purpose is to impact society and to empower community, democratize science, and address injustice. However, some ethical considerations need to be considered when citizen science are involved in a scientific research. And this is even the main purpose of BSEC, is to try to establish some ethical considerations model that can ensure that when citizen science are involved in a scientific project, they can be able to address those ethical issues. So the next slide. So one of the key components of BSEC is built based on the equitable adaptations pathways. which focus on the climate, environmental, and social priorities, and to mitigate or to, let's say, involve this community here in Baltimore. And one of the main teams of BSEC is the community engagement team, which, let's say, connect with the Equitable Pathway community that is composed with city and community agency members, and NGOs members, Justice 40 neighborhood organizations. And Morgan State University has a purpose of a role to lead these community meetings periodically. On the other hand, we do also have a community capacity buildings, whereby the missions is to, let's say, connect students and early researchers with communities members. However, one of the purpose of also this our community engagement is to establish some ethical considerations, including data quality and integrity, data sharing and intellectual properties, conflicts of interest and exploitations. Next slide. So the community engagement teams ensure collaborations between BSEC scientists, which are, let's say, composed in different STEM teams such as air quality, atmospheric dynamics, building and energy, transportation, vegetation, soil and ecosystems, water and water quality. And it's also composed with a community engagement coordinator that helps these connections between the community engagement team and different scientists, researchers. Next slide. So one of the key ethical considerations that needs to be considered is data quality, which is really important in any types of scientific projects involving citizens. So some challenges may happen related to accuracy and reliability of data. However, different researchers established 4 key components to rise that issues related to data quality, which incorporate reliability, ownership, data processing. So one of the main key missions of BSEC is to write some or establish some protocols that can raise those issues related to data collections in order to raise the issue related to data quality. Next slide. So the next is data sharing and intellectual properties, because we do know that it's really important to promote discussions, analysis, and constructive criticism in research. So it's really essential to expand knowledge study and to advance this scientific knowledge when we are collecting those data. So it's really important to sharing these data with community and everyone who contributes in the research. However, intellectual properties come because some participants, when they are participating in this kind of research, may have a certain of ownerships when they are collecting data information. So it's really important to discuss the data ownerships before the beginning of the project. And finally, we also do have the data ownerships can also raise conflicts of interest, because while aware of professional and personal interest can impact research impartiality, also financial conflicts and non-functional financial conflicts also are significant. And those non-financial conflicts may rise from personal or political agenda of citizen scientists. So addressing conflict of interest is really important for research credibility and neutrality. So some protocols also should be considered to ensure transparency, integrity, and unbiased of data connections. Next slide. So exploitations also is really one of the key components to be considered. because unjust exploitations of citizen science can lead to inequality and negative consequences. So risk is heightened as citizen scientists often contribute without financial compensation. So even if citizen science can participate voluntarily, so we need to think about how to compensate and to minimize overuse and ensure fair acknowledgement and let's say that and compensations by giving them a certain of ownership when they contribute to the research. So communications is also really important because to define clear duties and obligations of citizen science is also very important. Transparency helps to mitigate misunderstanding and ensure awareness of benefit challenges, and establish clear guidelines will allow to promote ethical and to conduct and to prevent that exploitation. Next slide. So we do know also recruitment is really important, and some of the recruitment process are the snowball sampling, the orientations workshops, the stakeholder networks intensive approach, and the citizen science directive. And in our recruiting process, we always take into considerations of involving community in Baltimore in order to to recruit participants in our research. Next slide. So some of the key conclusions based on this research is that we aim to build an ethical framework for inclusive citizen science. And some of these key components involve voluntary compensations to promote fair recognitions and inclusive for citizen science, data integrity to ensure the accuracy and the reliability of data collected in citizen science projects, intellectual property management to balance the rights of contributor with public access of data, and finally, conflict of interest mitigations to identify and to reduce bias to enhance research credibility. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Derek. And we're going to turn it over to Lisa to talk about a new research project that we'll be launching.
I'd like to suggest before we switch gears, why don't we take questions on the work that the BSEC engagement team has been doing? Is that okay, Tanya?
Oh, sure.
Great. So we can take just a minute or two here and then I can quickly review the slides. Are there any questions?
This is a quick one. It's just more so like the best contact. With the Dynamics group, we've been working with the weather stations, and we've kind of found a way to quantify the impact of the BSEC weather stations and how it shapes the magnitude of the urban heat island. And just curious who to best relay that to kind of give that, circle that back to the community. Is this the impact of the stuff that you've been doing?
I do believe Darren and then Dr. Shamar Collins is working on the weather stations.
Mm-hmm.
So they will probably be the best ones. And also you could always include Kalia in it. So because she might be able to get the information directly to the community quicker.
Okay.
Does someone else have a question? Oh, Nicholas.
Nicholas?
Yeah, I have a question for Derek. So you mentioned the sort of ethical concern for ownership of the data with the public and the communities that are volunteering and participating in the collection of that data. Isn't it by virtue of this being a government project and therefore paid for by the public that they are the implicit owner of any and all data collected? Or am I misunderstanding the relationship we have with the community?
Yes, so this current research is based on a literature review. So we do know that when we involve a community in participating in the research, they may feel to have ownerships in the data. So they may request maybe to get them to use them in their proper research or to use them in their proper project. So raising the issues of data ownership is really important, and make sure that all participants before the beginning of the project are understanding the data ownerships is really important. So that is even our aim in the future, is to establish a data ownership protocols whereby participants will understand that when they are participating in a project, these are the protocol that they must follow, they should follow in order to do their own research.
Thank you, Derek. Okay, we're gonna, sorry, I have to cut it short and turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you. So I'd like to bring everyone's attention to a supplemental award that all of the IFLs have to work together on looking at transdisciplinary team science. Sorry about that. So this project is being led by Allison Meadow from University of Arizona, but includes all of the IFLs. And Tanya and I have been working with the team representing BSEC. So the goal of this project is to look at how transdisciplinary science is being incorporated into the work of the IFLs. So it's increasingly accepted that transdisciplinary research is necessary to address so-called wicked problems like those involved in climate. And I'm going to define transdisciplinary as bringing together multidisciplinary teams around compelling research questions or issues. And most importantly, that transdisciplinary work brings together researchers with communities. So that's, there's different definitions. They're kind of vague, but that's at least, I think, how I am viewing it and how we've been talking about it in the context of this project. Do you have anything to add, Tanya?
Mhm. Good
Great.
job.
So the idea here is to basically understanding that transdisciplinary work is not easy. It's known to be challenging, and it often requires skills and expertise that are not necessarily inherent to standard scientific training or to the way that we do things. It's also time consuming. That's not what we've recognized here in the literature, but I think we all know that. In this project, what we're trying to do is to better understand how the IFLs are incorporating transdisciplinary research, but more importantly, to understand what it takes to address challenges that teams might be having, and to help the IFLs to conduct a assessment of their transdisciplinary goals, and to use that to understand perhaps some best practices and to also help to maybe make things work a little bit easier. So the time frame for this project is a year. We are going to start with some baseline assessment of what the different IFLs are doing in terms of team science and transdisciplinary research. Once we've collected that information and have a better understanding of what the teams are doing, then the intention is to deliver some professional learning sessions. So these will be online, and some of the topics that we've brainstormed are principles and practices of transdisciplinary research. Similar to and building off of what Derek just presented, we'll be putting together a module on ethical considerations in transdisciplinary research. And we'll also be looking at different methods for engaged research and scholarship. So those are what we've identified so far. If people have other ideas, please pass them on to Tanya and me, and we'll make sure that they get followed up. And then once we've done all of this, the intention is to hopefully do a follow-up assessment to determine whether the intervention of some of this training has led to any changes in the way that teams are conducting transdisciplinary work, any behavior changes after completing the professional development sessions. So our hope is to get as many of the researchers from the different IFLs to participate in these activities. And in the end, to put together assessments and tools and descriptions of the processes and best practices from the IFLs to be able to offer these modules, the professional learning modules that we put together as content that can be used elsewhere to report on the growth of transdisciplinary practices in the IFLs. And our hope is to ultimately be able to publish this as an academic paper. So we've been working up until now in putting together the initial survey, and Allison just had the survey and the protocol approved through the IRB at Arizona. So we are ready to distribute the survey. So please look for that next week. We are hoping that everyone that we consider to be researchers on the BSEC project will participate in this. So I'd like to get a little bit of a better idea from Mac and from probably Mac, who that might be. So we think, at least initially, that Ava, Mateus, Kelly, some of the folks that have been involved in writing the initial grant, that we should be incorporating them and considering them as part of the research team for the purposes of the survey that we're putting out. So I want to know from you whether, and also from Ben, if you have any insights, whether this is appropriate, and also if we want to do that, if the Slack is the best way to be able to get this survey out to recipients. You can answer now or offline.
Yeah, I think we'll just, in the interest of time, we can follow up offline, but yeah,
Okay.
definitely have some thoughts on that.
Great.
Can help
So
out.
I'll Tanya and I can coordinate with you on that, Mac, and then everyone else, please look for the survey and fill it out next week.
Yes.
And any questions?
This is great. So thank you, Lisa, for presenting that new project. That's going to be so helpful for us and the other IFLs. And thanks to the team. Great stuff. In the interest of time, as Mike just said, we should turn to atmospheric dynamics, and we can keep doing questions in the chat and this follow up. But I know we got Elliot and Nick. Who's going to be going first?
I'll start it off.
Great. Thanks, Elliot.
Cool. Not sure. Can everybody see this at full screen?
Yep.
Cool. All right. So good morning, everyone. For those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Elliot Faust. I'm a doc student at Penn State and advised by Ken Davis. And essentially, my research is on these broad mesoscale temperature variability or temperature patterns. And so to briefly dive into some of my research interest. Again, I'm looking at these larger scale temperature patterns. So I'm thinking of this as not necessarily at the neighborhood level, but what does it look like for the greater Baltimore area? And on top of that, I'm really interested in averages. And the reason for looking at averages is that this is kind of analogous to being able to determine what regions are persistently most exposed to extreme heat. And so I'm looking at this through both observations and numerical models. And if we have a really good understanding of what these temperature patterns look like, it begs us to tease out what does it look like if we implement some large scale mitigation strategies, and how does this affect these temperature patterns? So to just kind of orient everybody, I've shown many different permutations of this map, but this again shows the domain that I'm interested in, where DC's, which ranges from DC up to the Pennsylvania border. And this is a 100 by 100 kilometer domain. And within this, we have many observations. So 160 ground-based weather stations that are recording temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, and other variables. And this is an amalgamation of many different networks, whereas these red dots indicate some crowdsourced weather stations. There's several other mesonets, but I also do want to highlight these black circles, which are the BSEC stations, that are tied with BSEC researchers and many of the stakeholders and community partners that help fill these data void regions within the city. So these are the observations that I'm using to help understand these broader temperature patterns. And to look explicitly at some of the data, what I'm showing are monthly mean temperatures from this past August. And I'm looking at, I'm just cherry picking a few examples from this morning period, which is, you can think of this as just being ahead of sunrise, and this midday period. And these markers, the color of these markers shows the average temperatures at these individual stations, where temperatures generally range from about 4C, from like the highest to the lowest, for both of these simulations. And so looking at this panel to the left, you may see these cluster of markers, these red markers along the bay, and these darker colors to the northwest of the city, indicating a temperature gradient. Looking at it for the middle of the day, the gradient isn't as strong, but can kind of see a north-south gradient where you have warmer temperatures to the south of the city, cooler to the north of the city. But also the pattern is a little bit noisier during the daytime. And so I'm just highlighting this cluster of stations where you have pretty much a full range. They're all on top of each other. So this is a big component of these ground-based stations, is that they're marred by microclimates and other sources of local variability, whether they're from the instrument error, citing it. And so this ultimately muddles this temperature pattern, and it does make it harder for us to really distinguish what does this broad scale temperature pattern actually look like. So in trying to address that, one way that I'm trying to essentially filter out this mesoscale temperature variability from this microscale is to use some interpolation algorithms. And so there's two components with this interpolation: that one, it helps fill in the gaps, but two, it also applies a smoothing. And so this gives us a better understanding of what this broader variability looks like. And so just cherry picking a few examples, these markers here represent government stations, what somebody would look at if you're not aware of a lot of these local mesonets. This is what people often use, which gives a very coarse representation because there's not a lot of data to go off of, but it does show this gradient. Then when we add more stations, we started to get a more detailed pattern where we start to see these features such as Kent Island being very warm, being in the middle of the bay. We start to see these urban signatures, this cold tongue that's in between the two cities down here. And then we also see that when we go from this early morning period to the midday, or basically the hottest part of the day, these patterns shift significantly, where we don't necessarily have Kent Island being very warm, but we also see this urban corridor starts to become very warm, where we have some of the hottest temperatures south of the city. I do also want to point out, in this column, when we have just META stations, but this panel to the right includes the BSEC stations as well. And so this shows the impact of including some of these BSEC stations. I can even find a better example, but this does show you have these warmer areas inside the city, and around it that don't show up when you don't include the BSEC stations. So this does help us quantify the UHI a little bit. And just to give a eyeball comparison with models, we've evaluated this extensively, and prepping a paper on this. But overall, the model does pretty well. The Panels on the left show the observations that have been interpolated. The right is the model. You can kind of see that it does line up fairly well, where we still have warm this warm tongue around the city. And the model does capture some warmer areas south of the city, and and the model actually does very well at nighttime. For the sake of time, I'll bypass this slide, but essentially it points to our model results are pretty robust, and there's some work to collaborate with the Veg and Soils group. And just to really tie this together to see what temperature really looks like, I'm plotting some centroids of the warmest temperatures within these respective domains. And so starting with this panel on the left, these blue markers represent the nighttime, where these green and orange markers represent the middle of the day. So what this plot is showing is that the warmest temperatures are technically over Baltimore and DC, but if you basically split the difference, we're almost halfway in between, where the warmest temperatures during the nighttime sort of hug the coastline, indicating these coastal communities are warmer during the nighttime. But then during the day, temperatures retreat inland, but also south towards DC, indicating that the DC metro area may be warmer than the Baltimore metro area. And so this has ramifications for advection, especially in situations where warm air from DC may be advected towards Baltimore. And zoom in just over Baltimore, we see the warmest temperatures are to the southeast of the city. And this is a confluence of several factors, being the warm temperatures from the bay, heavy industrialization around here, and also at a low elevation. And then over the course of the day, we see these temperatures kind of migrate and essentially park themselves right over BWI. And then as the onset of evening, you almost see this clockwise loop or like around the bay. It kind of drives temperatures um, to the inner harbor and then towards the eastern edge of the city. So we kind of see this clockwise loop that sort of happens. So heat exposure does revolve over the course of the day. And lastly, I'll just briefly mention some mitigation work that we're doing. And this plot to the left is showing land cover, the way the model views urban areas. The model essentially sees all of these gray and red areas as being urban. And if we try to implement some mitigation, such as vegetation, reflective surfaces, it's going to apply it everywhere, which is massive in scale. And this is like some fully realized solution that is extremely ambitious and kicking the system very hard. So part of this work is extending the model and building in features that allow us to go in at the grid cell level, that allow us to do something a little bit more realistic and on the timelines that are of more interest to BSEC, where we can see what does it look like if we only apply mitigation in urban areas within the city limits, maybe just in the warmest regions or over low income communities. So this is a sense of more realistic mitigation approaches. And just showing a few points where this work links to and just some potential collaborations with other groups. I'm not necessarily going to won't really have the time to address all of these. Hopefully there are some people that say I can graduate before we get to all of these, but this is where some of this work ultimately leads to. So that's pretty much all I have there. Turn it over to Nick.
All right. Okay, just checking the time here. I'm just gonna share my full screen because I'm crazy like that. All right. Let's get to the top here. Okay, so my work actually builds off quite well from Elliot's because he touched a little bit on the point of advection and this the structure or the dynamic system I'd be looking at that called the Babe recirculation is at an intersection between the thermodynamic forcing at the land surface and the actual kinematic response felt in the atmosphere. And so let's get into it. Here is a basic understanding as to how bay breezes form. Effectively, it's driven by a thermal contrast in land surface temperature versus sea surface temperature. So Baltimore is situated along the coast, meaning this sort of gradient between land and water takes place. And by virtue of that temperature difference taking place, it drives the circulation. And you can see here, let me see if I can pull out a laser pointer. You can see here, this is the pressure gradient force that drives the breeze, and it comes inland a certain amount, it goes up, and then it returns back. I would say of all the things that are important to know here is that this inland extent is an important element of the structure. There is also a height to these kinds of bay breezes, and there is also an amount of forcing upwards ahead of the front. And these are sort of the things we'll be looking for when trying to both observe this and model this, which is the goal of the study. I actually have not only any kind of bay breeze, I have bay breezes that take place during the winter. And now winter is kind of an interesting area because a lot of the physical forcing mechanisms that make the bay breeze work are fundamentally different season to season. And that is no different here in the winter. And there are a few studies on this, but nowhere near as many as there have been conducted in the summer. And so that's kind of a novelty element of the work. And just some interesting things to point out is generally in the winter, you have shallower boundary layers that are typically more stable compared to their summer counterparts. And as a result, you also get bay breezes that occur later in the day. And also, oftentimes, they last longer. And so, and finally, and probably more importantly for the purpose of this study, is the land surface is characteristically different in the winter compared to the summer. Trees don't have leaves, and so that is one element that changes land cover. Since we are in an urban setting, though, I would not expect that to have a huge effect, but who knows? So you know the study region, but I wanted to point out a few things. Number one, we have an instrument, LiDAR. I don't know why I labeled it just instrument. The star here is a Doppler LiDAR, which can measure basically column measurements of horizontal winds with height. And then I also use 3 of the BSEC towers. These are labeled in consecutive plots, but I have them approaching the coastline here so that you can see as the bay breeze passes each site, how it modifies each tower's measurements differently, or if it's different at all. And then I am also over here plotting the domains that I used for the model runs. And for this study, I ran 2 models, or the same model, but with 2 different land use data sets, because I'm interested in seeing if I change the land use data set, what is the effect, what effect does that have on the land surface temperature? And then how does that affect the bay breeze formation itself? And so there's multiple layers to the problem here. So the 2 land use category data sets that I use are from NLCD and MODIS. NLCD is higher resolution and has more categories. Most notably, it has 3 urban categories, low, medium, high, compared to MODIS, which is coarse, and it has more generalized land use categories. It has only a single urban category. And the definitions of these are even different in where they're similar. So if that makes sense. But this is not a great plot, but you can see here the number one thing is that there are more land use categories in the NLCD land use, and there are less in the MODIS. So this is more general. So it's a simple question, where do the differences lie? This is a zoomed in version of that. This is how it affects the surface temperature. two big things you might notice is there's a lot of blue, which suggests that the model runs colder than what we're observing from satellite. And that's been kind of the crux of the issue for a very long time. Second thing, though, is you'll notice is that the water surface temperature or the sea surface temperature is actually well modeled, and that's because they're prescribed. We don't have to actually predict this. The model is just given it, and so that's why the sea surface temperature looks pretty good. And so talking about the gradients, you can see that if I'm necessarily keeping the land colder, that the gradient between water and land becomes diminished, which means the Bay Breeze circulation becomes weakened. And you'll notice between the two here that the most notable differences just so happen to be in the cities. So this is Washington, D.C., and this is Baltimore. And even in MODIS with the more generalized and probably smoother categories, you see that difference. Overall, though, the mean error is technically better for this one, even though it looks bluer. These differences in the cities really impact the overall model error. Looking at that land to sea temperature gradient, what I've done is I've simply drawn a line, and then I said, find me the closest points to that line, and then plot them. So x-axis in this case is distance along this line, and where 0 is at the location of my instrument. You'll notice I haven't showed you observations, that's coming, but just to point out that if the temperature here at the 0 is the temperature of the surface at the LiDAR station. Okay, and that is situated at Morgan State University. So the left side's in LCD, the right side's MODIS. You'll notice that difference here, that the land surface is in fact underestimating surface temperature that was observed, but you can kind of begin to then see what the difference between the water and the land actually is. And you'll see it's about 285 at the LiDAR station in the model, where in reality it is 292.5, and this is in Kelvin, sorry, 292.5. So it's not an insignificant difference. And like I said, this is our single water point. Water in these areas are kind of difficult to retrieve, or water temperatures are difficult to retrieve via satellite. So we have a single point in this transect, and it's pretty good, I would say. Matches in both cases, once again, because that's prescribed. And so they're both bad, pretty much. But that doesn't mean that there are insignificant differences, and that's what we're going to look at here. This is the actual observed Bay Breeze case that I have. This is 2024. Sorry, I'm giving it the wrong day. This is February 4th, 2024, so last winter. And the left is the tower sites that I mentioned, and they are in order from south to north. So the CARE site is this one. How these are diagnosed is basically looking at drops in temperatures, rises in dew points, and a corresponding shift in the wind. And you can, if you look at this plot with keen eyes, you'll find exactly where those points happen. The one that matters the most is the MSU site, though, because that's where the Doppler LiDAR is. And you can see that exactly at 16, you have this massive increase in dew point, about, I guess, 3 or 4, maybe 2.5 degrees. And even some weird distortions before that, which I'm still trying to understand what exactly that is. But point is we have this all of a sudden this change in air mass characteristics, right? And that is indicated here in the red. And you can see that we have this developed circulation now, and this is at 16 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon, which is close to when we would expect this to happen. And you also have rising air along the leading edge. So this is a pretty good case for looking at Bay Breeze dynamics, and it will be basically our benchmark. How does that look in the model, though? I'm delaying for suspense, but I wanted to look at the overall flow field of the model. right? We know because that the Bay breeze in this situation is in the opposite direction of the predominant flow, we should see a lot of convergence along the leading edge, right? We're on the western shore here with a northwesterly predominant flow. So these flows are coming together and we should expect rising action along there. And what you'll notice is this is at the same time in the NLCD model, once again on the left, and the MODIS model on the right. And even just looking at the broad wind patterns and looking at their divergence fields, you can see significant differences in location and intensity. You might say that this is a little more intense, whereas this is weaker, but you might also say that this is pushed back compared to this inland extent that is exhibited in the NLC data set. And so this is just the beginning of looking at the difference. If we actually look at the Bay breeze itself, looking along that transect again, I should clarify, the Bay breeze never makes it to the site in the model. Never happens. This is the time at which the Bay breeze should have passed the site, but didn't. And what I then did was looked at a spatial cross-section to say, well, where is it? And where is it indeed is about 6.5 kilometers close or further away from the 6.5 kilometers away from the LiDAR site. Once again, NLCD on the left, MODIS on the right. Two important things to notice is that in the MODIS data set, the Bay breeze is better developed. Okay, so it has stronger winds and it is more predominant out of the southeast, whereas this is more of a shifting pattern and the winds are weaker. Nevertheless, though, despite that, the NLCD Bay breeze reaches further inland compared to the MODIS. So despite having a more pronounced flow feature in the model, it gets limited in its inland extent. And we're still trying to figure out exactly why that is. These are relatively new results. But just to point out, all we changed here was the land use classification. And we're seeing significant differences in the flow field here. So hopefully I'm doing well on time here. But overall, here's the summary and sort of some future work. We looked at some land use effects on Bay breeze simulations and compared them to observations. We looked at NLCD and MODIS, and future work is going to also look at more cases and also look at different flow fields, not just Bay breezes, but other kinds of regional scale flows that affect the inner city atmospheric conditions. And I'll end with that.
Great. Thanks so much, Elliot and Nick. And I realize it's hard to fit 2 theme teams into one session now because I've just got such great work to present. So I know we're going to start losing some folks here. Elliot, I don't know if you saw Dr. Shamar had a question in the chat, but then it looks like she may have had to drop. So maybe you could follow up with her on that. Oh, no, there she is. She's still here. So I don't know if you want to.
Hey, no, it's okay. It's
Actually,
classes are transitioning for me, so
Okay.
it may be best to talk offline. I do have a question for you, Nick and Elliot, so I'll just message you both. Thank you.
Great.
Bye.
Thank you. All right. We are at time. I know I've got questions for Elliot and Nick, but I can follow up with you guys. Does anybody want to get a quick question in before we leave off? All right. If not, thank you. That was an amazing powerhouse series of presentations. There is so much food for thought and good stuff to follow up on. So thank you to both the atmospheric dynamics and the community engagement theme team. We'll be in touch very soon. Take care.